In a time of innovation and discovery, one man would help change how we all looked at one thing: child labor. Forms of child labor, including indentured servitude and child slavery, have existed throughout American history. As industrialization moved workers from farms and home workshops into urban areas and factory work, children were often preferred because factory owners viewed them as more manageable, cheaper, and less likely to strike. Growing opposition to child labor in the northern states caused many factories to move to the south so factory workers could continue their trade without protest. By the early 1900s, states varied considerably in whether they had child labor standards and in their content and degree of enforcement. By then, American children worked in large numbers in mines, glass factories, textiles, agriculture, canneries, home industries, and as newsboys, messengers, bootblacks, and peddlers. By the early decades of the 20th century, the numbers of child laborers in the U.S. peaked because protests began to decrease. Nobody really had a definite idea of what was going on in the mills and factories. Child labor began to decline as labor and reform movements grew, and labor standards in general began improving, increasing the political power of working people and other social reformers to demand legislation on regulating child labor. Union organizing and child labor reform were often connected, and common interviews were conducted by organizations led by working women and middle-class consumers such as state consumers' leagues and working women's societies. These organizations helped create the National Consumers League in 1899 and the National Child Labor Committee in 1904, which shared the goals of challenging child labor, including through anti-sweatshop campaigns and labeling programs. The National Child Labor Committee work to end child labor was combined with efforts to provide free education for all children and helped in the passage of the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, which set federal standards for child labor. Many industrial photographers and activists like Lewis Hine felt it was their right and responsibility to show the public that child labor was something that needed to be brought up to federal officiates. Born on September 26, 1874, in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, Louis Wickies Hines was an American sociologist and industrial photographer who shared his views on child labor through the lens of his camera. Working as an investigative photographer for the National Child Labor Committee, Louis Hine documented working and living conditions of children in the United States between 1908 and 1924. In many instances, Louis Hine had to trick his way into factories so that factory managers would not know the extent of his work. Most of the images Hine captured were not what mill owners wanted the public to see. Hine received a great deal of criticism for not portraying the full story of textile mill life, and some even thought he staged his photos to make them look more shocking and made them even more fake. In his response, Hine was careful to document every photograph with precise facts and figures. He interviewed the immigrant children while they were working and then scribbled notes with his hand hidden inside his pocket and estimated their height by using the buttons on his coat. This is how he gathered information for the photo captions and reports that he sent to the National Child Labor Committee and other agencies for them to be reviewed and then published. I wanted to show the thing that had to be corrected. I wanted to show things that had to be appreciated. Louis Hine. The National Child Labor Committee's photos are useful for the study of labor, reform movements, children, working-class families, education, public health, urban and rural housing conditions, industrial and agricultural sites, and other aspects of urban and rural life in America in the early 20th century during the Progressive Era.
Sort of at the zenith of the Progressive Era. Progressive Era was a time in which social reform was very popular, where you had people who wanted to have more democracy, political progressives, so you had direct election of senators. You had the referendum, the recall, the initiative, legislation, sort of levers of government that would allow people to be more directly influence the process. You had economic progressives, people who saw the importance of technology. Progressive Era is a time similar to our own in that the idea that we have the technologies, we have the tools, we have the talent.
The Progressive Era, which was in 1890 to 1920 in the United States, was a time when reformists sought to eliminate corruption in the government, regulate business practices, address health hazards, improve working conditions, and give the public more direct control over the government. This mainly resulted from the Industrial Revolution, which was a transition to manufacturing processes in the period from about 1760 to sometime between 1820 and 1840. This transition included going from hand production methods to machines, new chemical manufacturing and iron production processes, improved efficiency of water power, and increased the use of steam power in the development of machine tools. The problem of child labor is closely related to the problem of unemployment and was breaking the ties of the human race. This caused many industries to hire underage children. Most working children labored around unsafe machinery for many hours, with receiving wages that were much lower than those received by adult laborers for the same exact work. Each and every industry that emerged during the Industrial Revolution helped to the detriment of the health and social well-being of its young workers. Lewis Hine traveled to the United States from filming, photographing, and documenting children at work. His photographs were published in several newspapers. The public now had access to images from within the walls of factories and from the underground mines.
Well, I think it's probably compel people to act. Yeah, absolutely. But it's at least be aware. They were certainly aware of the issue.
The photographs expressed the terrible conditions in which America's children labored. The majority of the public desired reform, whereas the business community refused to acknowledge that child labor was a serious issue. After a great deal of protest from the National Child Labor Committee and Lewis Hine, Congress and President Woodrow Wilson passed the first child labor bill, the Keating-Owen Act, in 1916. This act banned the sale of any goods or services provided by child labor, and it regulated the number of hours a child could work to only 8 hours a day. Many progressives and Republicans embraced his efforts, but only 2 years later, the Supreme Court declared the Keating-Owen Act unconstitutional. The Supreme Court stated that Congress is using its power to change interstate commerce rights and did not have the right to police goods that were sold between states. Lewis Hine's photographs in newspapers and letters showed people that they had a responsibility to give children better working rights, and soon caused many people to protest about this. Before Lewis Hine's photographs, many people who hadn't been working in the factories didn't have a very big awareness about what was going on. Lewis Hine's long-term impact is also important to the nation. It wasn't until the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 that caused many families to finally truly understand what was going on in the factories was truly wrong. The Fair Labor Standards Act restricts the number of hours that children under the age of 16 can work and forbids the employment of children under the age of 18 in certain jobs that seem too dangerous, and provides children under the age of 16 a well-deserved education. The Fair Labor Standards Act is still used in the United States. Lewis Hine's photographs are still very well known today and have inspired the Lewis Hine Awards. Every year, the National Child Labor Committee gives out this award to people who have worked hard as advocates for children. By using his name, the committee honors both the work he did and the impact he made for the lives of young people all over America. Over 200 people have been honorees of this prestigious award. However, Lewis Hine did not live to see legislation because he died on November 3, 1940 in Dobbs Ferry, New York, before anybody started making changes to the treatment. Lewis Hine changed how people looked at child labor because he felt he had a responsibility to change many of these young children's rights. His popular industrial photographs showed many people across the nation that treating children like this wasn't right. Although Lewis Wilkes Hine's legacy was soon forgotten by most, his photographs still continue to be a crucial part of United States history.
Because they are so beautiful.
Yeah.
And they are, I mean, you can tell when you see the child labor photographs that he got an amazing access, right? I mean, there aren't other pictures like that. There just aren't.
Perhaps you are weary of child labor pictures. Well, so are the rest of us. But we propose to make you and the whole country so sick and tired of the whole business that when time for action comes, child labor pictures will be records of the past. Lewis Hine.